I went to a party with the wife of the man my wife was sleeping with, and what followed was nothing short of brutal. But I saw it coming, and honestly, I welcomed it. New York City has always been a place where secrets thrive. They bounce off glass towers, slip into dimly lit alleys, and settle like ghosts in the subway tunnels. If betrayal had a home, it would be here. And last Friday, I stumbled across one that threatened to rip my entire world apart. It all started with a text, one I was never supposed to see. It wasn't mine, it was hers. "Can you come earlier? Can't wait to see you again." The words burned from the screen of Haley's phone, their meaning undeniable. If she hadn't left her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter while rushing off to grab her bag, I never would have seen it. But she did. We had been together for 10 years. A decade of laughter, fights, and what I thought was an unshakable bond. But in that moment, everything shattered into sharp, unforgiving pieces. My pulse thundered in my ears as I stared at the screen, and before I could stop myself, I was scrolling. The sender was saved under Connor, work. But the more I read, the more obvious it became. This wasn't about work. There were mentions of hotel rooms, late-night meetups, conversations laced with a kind of intimacy no colleague should ever share. And then, the gut punch, a message confirming their next rendezvous at the Chelsea Lounge later that night. Haley walked back into the kitchen, completely oblivious to the hurricane inside me. She kissed my cheek, like she always did, grabbed her keys and said, "Heading out for dinner with some colleagues. Don't wait up." "Sure." My voice was steady, my face unreadable. I didn't let on that I knew. Not yet. As the door clicked shut behind her, I sank into a chair, staring at her phone like it might explode. Betrayal does something strange to time. It stretches every second, forces you to relive every moment you thought was real. I sat there, replaying the last 10 years, every late-night conversation, every promise, every plan for the future. And now, while I sat here like some clueless idiot, she was off to meet another man at a bar. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there. Demand an explanation. Call her out. But no, that would be too simple. Too easy. A confrontation would only give her the chance to spin the story, to cry, to make excuses. No, I wanted something more. I wanted her to feel what I was feeling. And that's when the idea took shape. Step 1? Find out who this Connor really was. A quick search online gave me everything I needed. Thomas Blackwell. A high-powered corporate lawyer who clearly loved flaunting his wealth. And there she was, Haley, right beside him in a photo from some fancy company gala. My stomach twisted, but then I noticed something else. Standing next to him was another woman. Her arm linked through his, petite and elegant, with sleek brown hair and a sharp, sophisticated smile. She looked like the definition of Manhattan elite. Brooke Blackwell. His wife. For a second, I hesitated. Dragging someone else into this mess felt almost cruel. But the longer I thought about it, the clearer it became. Brooke deserved to know the truth about her husband just as much as I deserved payback for Haley's lies. The next morning, I stationed myself outside Thomas Blackwell's luxury high-rise on the Upper East Side. A towering blend of glass and steel, the building was more than just an architectural masterpiece. It was a fortress, shielding lives of wealth and privilege behind its sleek facade. When Brooke finally emerged, draped in a perfectly tailored trench coat and clutching a leather tote, I knew it was time to make my move. "Brooke Blackwell?" I called out, my voice firm but polite. She paused, her heels clicking against the pavement as she turned toward me. "Yes? Do I know you?" "No," I admitted, keeping my tone steady. "But we have something in common, our spouses." Her brow furrowed, confusion flickering across her face as she tried to make sense of my words. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. Your husband, Connor, and my wife, Haley," I said, holding up my phone. The incriminating text glowed on the screen like a neon warning sign. "I think we need to talk." As her gaze locked onto the messages, the color drained from her face. For a second, I thought she might lose her balance, but she tightened her grip on her bag, steadying herself. "You're sure about this?" she whispered, her voice brittle with shock. "No doubt." I met her eyes, unwavering. "I'm not here to cause a scene." I just figured you had a right to know. She stood frozen, staring at the damning evidence. Then, something in her shifted. The initial disbelief in her gave way to something colder, sharper. A quiet, simmering fury. Do you have a plan? She asked, her voice stronger now. And that's when it hit me. I had completely misjudged her. Brooke wasn't the type to crumble under betrayal. She was the kind who sharpened heartbreak into a weapon. And in that moment, I knew exactly what needed to happen. Yeah, I said, my mind already racing. And it involves you. Her eyebrow lifted slightly, intrigue flickering behind her hardened stare. Go on. I'm listening. For the next hour, we sat in a cafe a few blocks away, piecing together every detail of our plan over steaming lattes and shared devastation. By the time we walked out, we had crafted something so meticulously ruthless that, for a fleeting second, I almost felt bad for Haley and Connor. Almost. That evening, Brooke and I stood outside the grand entrance of the Chelsea Lounge. The floor-to-ceiling glass doors reflected the Manhattan skyline behind us, a shimmering testament to how deeply this betrayal had cut into our lives. Brooke exhaled sharply, smoothing down the lapel of her coat. Her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted her collar, though whether it was nerves or sheer fury, I couldn't tell. You're sure about this? She asked, her voice level despite the electricity in the air. I nodded, my jaw set. More than ever. Let's see how they like being blindsided. On the surface, our plan seemed simple. But every move, every calculated step, was designed for maximum impact. This wasn't just about confrontation. It was about stripping away their deception, exposing them with nowhere left to run. If Haley and Connor thought they could keep their affair tucked away in the shadows, they were about to learn exactly what happens when those shadows are dragged into the light. As we stepped into the lounge, a warm, golden glow washed over us. The air carried a heady mix of expensive perfume, freshly poured martinis, and hushed, intimate conversations. Brooke moved with effortless confidence, the kind of poise that came naturally to people who belonged in places like this. I, on the other hand, had to make a conscious effort not to stick out. It didn't take long to spot them. Haley and Connor sat tucked away in a dimly lit corner booth, leaning in close, completely lost in each other. Haley wore a red dress I'd never seen before, one that hugged her figure in a way that sent a sick twist through my stomach. Connor, with his slicked back hair and tailored designer suit, had his hand resting comfortably on her thigh, as if it had always belonged there. The sight of them together hit me like a gut punch. But I shoved the anger down, forcing myself to focus. This wasn't about emotion, it was about execution. Brooke caught my gaze, and with a single nod, we moved. They were wrapped up in their own little world, whispering, laughing, completely oblivious to the storm headed their way. Brooke came to a sudden halt, her lips pressing into a thin, unforgiving line. Look at them, she muttered, her voice a blade sharpened by resentment. Playing house like they have nothing to hide. Her words snapped me out of my haze. You ready? I asked, keeping my tone steady. She squared her shoulders, her expression hardening. Let's do this. With measured steps, we closed in. The second Haley's gaze landed on me, her smile faltered, freezing in place as panic flickered through her wide eyes. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Connor, still blissfully unaware, turned lazily, until he saw Brooke. In an instant, his entire demeanor shifted. Brooke, he stammered, his face straining of color. Hello, Connor. She greeted him coolly, sliding into the booth beside him like she had all the time in the world. Don't mind us. We thought we'd join you for a drink. I moved in just as quickly, cutting off Haley's escape by sliding into the seat next to her. The familiar floral scent of her perfume lingered in the air between us. Surprised to see me, sweetheart? I asked, my voice laced with sarcasm. She swallowed hard, her fingers fumbling nervously with the hem of her dress. I thought you were at home. I was, I replied, my tone sharp as glass. But then I had this nagging feeling I was missing out on something. Turns out I was right. Connor, clearly unraveling, tried to salvage the moment. Brooke, I can explain. Oh, I'm sure you can. She cut him off, her voice slicing through his excuse like a knife. You've always been good at talking your way out of things. It's your actions I have a problem with. By now, we had an audience. Conversations around us softened, replaced by the subtle buzz of curiosity. Haley shifted in her seat, her eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape that wasn't there. Can we not do this here? She hissed, voice low, pleading. I leaned in, just enough to let my words carry. Why not? I shot back, my voice deliberately louder. You didn't seem to mind being here with him. Brooke leaned back, arms crossed, her expression an unyielding mask of cold fury. Funny, isn't it? You two slinking around, thinking you were untouchable. Did it never occur to you that secrets like this always find their way into the light? Connor's jaw tightened, his glare sharp as he turned to Brooke. If you want to have this conversation, he said, his voice taut with restraint, let's do it somewhere private. Brooke let out a bitter laugh, her lips curling into a smirk. Oh no, Connor. Privacy is a privilege you gave up the moment you decided to parade your affair around in public. She leaned in slightly, her voice cool and deliberate. But please, enlighten us. Tell us, how did this all begin? The weight of the silence that followed was suffocating. Haley looked ready to disappear into the floor, while Connor struggled for words that refused to come. The tension stretched unbearably long until Brooke shattered it with a slow, mocking clap. Well, this is a rare treat, she mused, dripping with sarcasm. The great Connor Blackwell, at a loss for words. Someone should really document this moment. It's practically historic. A few muffled chuckles rippled through the nearby tables. Connor's face turned an angry shade of red, while Haley sat frozen, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Good. Let them squirm. I think we should go. Haley mumbled finally, reaching for her purse. But I wasn't about to let her off that easy. Blocking her path, I leaned in slightly. In a hurry? That's strange. You looked perfectly at ease just a few minutes ago. Connor shot up from his seat, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is ridiculous, he snapped. Brooke, let's go. But she didn't budge. Instead, she fixed him with a stare so sharp it could cut glass. No, Connor. You can go. I'm staying right here. His frustration simmered beneath the surface, his hands clenching into fists at his sides as he searched for a way to regain control. Haley turned to me, her gaze desperate, silently pleading for an escape. But I stood firm, unmoved. This was their mess, and now they had to sit in it. As they hurried toward the exit, the murmur of whispers trailed after them, growing like a wildfire among the curious onlookers. Brooke and I remained in our seats, victorious in the aftermath of a battle fought in the open. But I knew deep down, this was far from over. That night, long after the dust had settled, adrenaline still surged through my veins, making sleep impossible. Brooke and I sat in my dimly lit living room, a half-empty bottle of whiskey between us. The ice in our glasses clinked softly as we nursed our drinks, our minds still spinning with the possibilities of what came next. The plan's not finished yet, Brooke murmured, her voice even but laced with fire. But one thing's certain, we're not done. Not by a long shot. She took a slow sip, her eyes burning with the same determination I felt in my gut. This isn't just about humiliating them, she continued. We need to hit them where it really hurts. Make them feel the kind of pain they so carelessly handed us. Brooke was right. Confronting them in public had been satisfying, a raw, electric kind of satisfaction, but it wasn't nearly enough. What Haley and Connor had done wasn't just a betrayal. It was a violation, one that cut deep and left scars that a single confrontation couldn't erase. No, we needed more. We needed something permanent. Leaning back in my chair, I let my gaze drift toward the cracked ceiling, my mind whirring with possibilities. What if, I mused, we take their affair and turn it into a weapon? Brooke arched an eyebrow, intrigued. Go on. I leaned forward, the energy in my voice building. Connor's a high-profile lawyer. He's got a reputation to protect. And Haley, she's spent years crafting this perfect wife, perfect mother illusion. What happens when we rip that facade apart and show the world who they really are? A slow, dangerous smile curled at the corners of Brooke's lips. You're talking about going public. Not just public, I corrected, lowering my voice. Controlled. Precise. We don't just drop a bomb and hope it lands, we make sure it detonates exactly where it'll do the most damage. For the next few hours, we worked relentlessly, laying out every angle of our plan. Brooke had access to Connor's private accounts, and I'd already sifted through Haley's emails and texts. Between the two of us, we had everything we needed: incriminating photos, damning messages, receipts from their secret meetings. Evidence so airtight it would crush any feeble attempt at denial. By the time we were done, my living room looked less like a place to unwind and more like a war room. Printouts littered the floor, notebooks lay open with hastily scribbled strategies, and empty whiskey glasses lined the coffee table like casualties of battle. Brooke tapped her pen against the table, scanning the controlled chaos around us. "All right," she said. "We've got the evidence. Now, where do we hit them?" I didn't even have to think about it. Connor's firm. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine. His firm? I nodded. He's got influence there. Big cases, high-profile clients. What do you think happens when this little scandal lands on his boss's desk? Brooke's expression shifted, calculating, assessing, before she finally nodded. It could ruin him. Exactly. The gears in my mind kept turning, the plan expanding with every second. And Haley, she's built her world around PTA meetings, charity functions, her little curated suburban fantasy. What happens when that world comes crashing down? Brooke was quiet for a moment, letting the full weight of our plan settle over her. Then, with an almost imperceptible smirk, she lifted her glass. To burning it all down. We clinked glasses, the sound ringing sharp in the quiet room. And for the first time in days, something stirred in my chest, not just the fire of revenge, but the first flicker of control. This wasn't just about payback anymore. It was about reclaiming the pieces of ourselves they had so carelessly shattered. The next morning, I woke up early, the weight of the plan pressing down on me like a lead blanket. My head ached, a dull reminder of the whiskey from the night before, but it wasn't the hangover that made my stomach churn, it was what we had set in motion. I glanced over at the couch, where Brooke had crashed for the night. She looked impossibly put together, sitting cross-legged, bathed in the soft glow of morning light, her sharp features unreadable as she scrolled through her phone. A steaming cup of coffee rested on the table beside her. "I sent the email," she said without looking up. My pulse spiked. "To who?" Brooke finally set her coffee down and met my gaze. "Connor's boss," she said simply. "I attached everything, texts, photos, even the receipts. It's done." I exhaled slowly, the weight of it all settling over me. There was no going back now. "And Haley?" A faint smirk ghosted across Brooke's lips. "I thought I'd leave that part to you," she said with a casual shrug. "You know her world better than I do." She was right. Haley had spent years constructing her flawless image, the devoted wife, the PTA queen, the woman who had it all. Ripping that apart wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about precision. About understanding exactly what strings to pull to unravel her completely. I grabbed my laptop and started typing, crafting an email designed to detonate inside our shared social circle, the PTA moms, the charity committees, the neighbors who worshipped her perfect suburban act. "Subject line?" Brooke asked, peering over my shoulder with a wicked grin. I smirked. "How about a betrayal close to home?" She let out a low chuckle. "Savage." The evidence spoke for itself. The screenshots, the photos, the receipts, it painted a picture so damning, so undeniable, that Haley wouldn't be able to talk her way out of this one. When I hit send, a strange calm settled over me. This was it. The point of no return. By noon, the fallout had begun. Brooke's phone buzzed with a message from one of Connor's colleagues. "He's been called into the office," she said, holding up the screen. "Apparently, the partners aren't happy." "Good," I muttered, a cold satisfaction creeping in. "That's just the beginning." Haley, meanwhile, was spiraling. Her phone had been blowing up all day, calls, texts, desperate attempts to control the narrative. I knew this because she kept trying to call me, too, her name flashing across my screen every few minutes. I didn't answer. Let her sit in it. Let her feel every second of the panic and dread she'd forced onto me. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Brooke and I were back in the living room, watching the chaos unfold like spectators at a car crash. It was brutal. It was messy. And it was exactly what they deserved. But we weren't done. Not yet. The night air was crisp as we stepped out into the heart of Manhattan. The city pulsed around us, neon lights flickering against the darkened sky, the faint wail of a saxophone drifting from a street performer on the corner. It should have been a peaceful night, the kind that settled the soul. But inside my mind was a storm. Tonight was about closure. About bringing everything full circle. Brooke had spent the day tying up loose ends, making sure our work hit with precision. From what she gathered through a trusted source at the firm, Connor had been summoned to a mandatory meeting. And not the kind where they smooth things over with a slap on the wrist. No, this was serious. His house of cards was teetering, and all it would take was one final push to send it crashing down. The partners weren't just angry, they were livid. The scandal we had unleashed was like poison, spreading through Connor's professional world faster than he could contain it. His name was officially a liability, his reputation stained beyond repair. It was only a matter of time before they cut him loose entirely. Haley, on the other hand, was unraveling in real time. My phone buzzed constantly with her frantic calls and messages, each voicemail sounding more desperate than the last. "Lucas, please, I need to talk to you. I don't know what's happening, but everyone's turning on me. The neighbors, the PA. They've all seen something. I don't know what you've done, but please, just call me." I deleted each message without hesitation, my anger simmering every time her voice filled the room. As Brooke and I turned onto a quieter street, she cast me a sideways glance. "You're sure she'll show up?" I smirked. "Oh, she'll come. When people like Haley feel their world crumbling, they'll do anything to claw it back. She can't resist the chance to try and regain control." We'd arranged to meet Haley and Connor at an upscale restaurant on the Upper West Side, a neutral, public setting, or at least that's what they thought. In reality, it was a trap, one they were walking into blind. Haley had always loved this place, pristine white tablecloths, dim candlelight, the kind of exclusivity that fed her vanity. Making the reservation under my name guaranteed she'd take the bait. By the time we arrived, they were already seated. And they looked terrible. Gone was the polished, confident couple they loved to present to the world. Instead, they looked like two people barely holding on, clinging to the wreckage of their lives. Good. The moment Haley spotted me, her face twisted with a mix of fear and defiance. "Lucas, what's going on?" she demanded, her voice edged with panic. "What is all of this?" Connor, ever the lawyer, tried for indifference, but the tension in his posture betrayed him. "Brooke," he said stiffly, offering a tight nod. "I didn't think you'd stoop to something like this." Brooke let out a sharp, humorless laugh as she slid into her seat. "Stooping? That's rich, coming from a man who sank so low he could shake hands with the devil." I settled into my chair across from Haley, watching her squirm under the weight of the moment. I wanted her to feel this, every ounce of discomfort, every creeping realization that she was no longer in control. "Relax," I said, keeping my voice calm, measured. "We're just here to clear the air." Connor scoffed, crossing his arms. "This isn't a courtroom. If you've got something to say, just say it." Brooke didn't miss a beat. She reached into her bag, pulled out a thick folder, and dropped it onto the table with a deliberate thud. "Gladly," she said, flipping it open. "Let's start with the emails, shall we?" Haley paled. Her breathing hitched. Brooke, unfazed, began reading aloud, word for word, the messages Haley and Connor had exchanged. Each line was a fresh wound, slicing through the carefully constructed facade they'd worked so hard to maintain. The quiet murmur of the restaurant made it worse. The soft clinking of silverware, the occasional pop of a champagne cork, normal sounds that only heightened the tension at our table. A few diners had turned their heads, sensing the storm brewing in our corner. "You need to stop," Haley hissed, her voice tight with panic. "People are staring." I leaned back, arms crossed. "Let them." My tone was ice cold. "They deserve to see who you really are." Connor's patience snapped. He slammed his hand on the table, the sharp crack making a few heads turn. "This is harassment," he barked. "You think you can just humiliate us and walk away?" I tilted my head, considering his words, and then smiled. Who said anything about walking away? Brooke's smile was razor-sharp, her eyes gleaming with dark satisfaction. Oh, we're not walking away, she said smoothly, tilting her head just enough to make Connor flinch. We're just getting started. Right on cue, a waiter hesitated beside our table, his polite demeanor strained with unease. Is everything all right here? I met his nervous gaze with an easy smile. Perfectly fine. Just a little family discussion. He nodded, clearly unconvinced but unwilling to get involved, and backed away. Haley's hands were trembling now, her perfectly curated composure crumbling before my eyes. Lucas, she pleaded, her voice cracking. You don't understand. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I leaned forward, lowering my voice to a sharp, cutting tone. Then explain it to me. I folded my hands on the table, watching her squirm. Explain how sneaking around behind my back was part of some grand plan. I'm all ears. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. For the first time, Haley had nothing to say. Brooke seized the moment like a predator scenting blood. She turned her sharp gaze to Connor, tilting her head as if she were considering something amusing. You know what's interesting? She mused. How quickly your little empire is crumbling. Do you really think your clients will stick around once they see the photos? Connor's jaw tightened. You wouldn't dare. Brooke shrugged, her expression cold, detached. Wouldn't I? Silence fell over the table, thick and suffocating. The weight of everything we had set in motion pressed down on them like a lead blanket. Haley turned to me, eyes glassy with unshed tears. Her voice was barely a whisper. Lucas, please, we can fix this. I shook my head slowly, feeling the last, frayed threads of whatever love I'd once had for her dissolve into nothing. No, Haley. You broke it. Now you get to live with the pieces. Brooke and I walked out into the cool night air, leaving them behind in the wreckage. The city hummed around us, horns blaring, lights flashing, life moving on. But for a while, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy. Satisfying. Finally, Brooke exhaled a quiet laugh. Think they got the message? I smirked. Oh, they got it. I slid my hands into my pockets, letting the moment settle. But it's not over yet. Because what Haley and Connor didn't know was that the final blow was already in motion. The fallout was immediate, and glorious. By the next morning, Haley and Connor were officially in panic mode. Their once flawless lives were unraveling at the seams, and they couldn't stitch the damage back together fast enough. For Brooke and me, though, this was just the beginning. The real endgame was about to begin. It started with a single phone call. I'd been digging into Connor long before Brooke and I teamed up. The affair with Haley was just the tip of the iceberg. Turns out, Connor had a history, one that didn't look good under a spotlight. A few quiet conversations with the right people had uncovered a string of shady dealings, misappropriated client funds, under-the-table agreements, and case outcomes that looked suspiciously manipulated. And I wasn't the only one who wanted him taken down. A former paralegal from his firm, now freelancing, had been more than happy to talk. On the record. When I passed the details to Brooke, she didn't even hesitate. This isn't just personal anymore, she said, her eyes flashing with something fierce. This is justice. Haley, meanwhile, had no idea that her perfect little world was collapsing from another angle entirely. While Brooke focused on dismantling Connor's professional life, I had been quietly tearing apart Haley's social kingdom. The emails I'd sent to her friends and neighbors? Just the opening act. The PDA, the sacred altar of her suburban status, was now buzzing with whispers, the kind that spread like wildfire in tightly wound circles. The women who once fawned over her curated perfection were now sharpening their claws. One particularly vicious mom had even started a rumor that Haley hadn't just slept with Connor, she'd made a habit of it with others too. I didn't correct the record. Why would I? Let the lies, the truths, and the messy in-between swirl together like a storm, ripping through everything she had built. It wasn't enough to expose her affair. I wanted her to feel the sting of isolation, the slow suffocation of social exile. And the best part? We weren't even done yet. The air in the ballroom felt charged, thick with the kind of tension that came before a storm. Connor stood frozen on the stage, his carefully constructed world collapsing in front of Manhattan's elite. Haley, still near the bar, was shaking. Her polished, impenetrable exterior had cracked wide open, leaving her raw, exposed, and drowning under the harsh glow of the spotlight. Gasps rippled through the crowd, turning into murmurs, then into barely concealed laughter. The charity gala had morphed into something far more gripping, a scandal playing out in real time, and Brooke and I were the ones pulling the strings. Brooke, never one to miss a perfectly dramatic moment, stepped forward. The click of her heels against the marble floor was like a drumroll, her confidence an unshakable force. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly over the stunned room. "I think we all deserve to know exactly who we're dealing with, don't you?" Every eye was glued to the massive screen behind Connor, where texts, photos, and even financial records from his shady dealings flashed like a damning slideshow. Some guests gawked at the evidence, their disbelief slowly morphing into disgust. Others kept their eyes locked on the real-life implosion happening before them, too transfixed to look away. Connor finally found his voice, though it cracked with desperation. "This is a violation! You can't do this!" Brooke arched a brow, her smirk razor-sharp. "Violation?" she echoed, her tones silk-wrapped steel. "Kind of like how you violated every promise you ever made? To your clients, your firm, and oh, let's not forget Haley's husband?" The room sucked in a collective breath. The name drop landed like a slap, sending a fresh ripple of shock through the crowd. From the corner of my eye, I saw Haley bolt toward the stage, her panic finally snapping into action. Her voice rose, shrill and desperate. "Stop this! You've made your point. Please, just stop." But we weren't finished. Not even close. I stepped forward, locking my gaze on her for the first time. "Stop?" I echoed, my voice sharp as ice. "Did you ever pause to consider anyone else when you shattered my world? When you crushed every bit of trust one placed in you? No, Haley. You don't get to plead for mercy now." The room felt like it was vibrating with tension. No one even bothered to pretend they weren't watching anymore. Glasses were quietly set down, hushed whispers grew louder, and the occasional flash from a phone's camera made it clear. This moment wasn't staying within these four walls. Haley turned to me, tears carving streaks through her makeup, her voice fragile and trembling. "Lucas, I know I hurt you, but this? This is just cruel." "Cruel?" I shot back, a bitter laugh escaping before I could stop it. "Cruel is watching someone you love demolish everything you built together. Cruel is being left to pick up the shattered pieces of your life while they parade around like nothing ever happened." I pointed to the screen, where one last image burned into everyone's memory, a crystal-clear shot of Haley and Connor tangled up in their affair, undeniable and damning. This isn't cruelty. This is justice." Connor lunged at Brooke, his face twisted in rage. "You're both insane! You think this makes you better than us?" Brooke didn't even flinch. Her smile was razor-sharp, cool and composed. "No, Connor. We don't think we're better. We just know you're worse." The host stumbled over his words, clearly scrambling to regain some control, mumbling something about getting back to the program. But it was pointless. The damage was done. Haley and Connor's carefully crafted images were in ruins, their shame exposed for everyone to see. Without another glance back, Brooke and I turned and walked out, leaving the wreckage of our confrontation behind. The echoes of gasps, hushed murmurs, and a few stifled laughs followed us as we stepped into the crisp night air. Outside, the city lights sparkled like they were celebrating with us. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. Brooke glanced over at me, her red lips curling into a victorious grin. "Well," she said, slipping her arm through mine, "I'd say that was a night to remember." I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight I'd been carrying finally start to lift. "It's over," I murmured, almost like I was trying to convince myself. "Not just over," Brooke replied, her voice filled with quiet satisfaction. "It's finished." And for the first time, I truly believed her. The tension in the ballroom was so thick, it felt like the whole room was holding its breath. Connor's shoulders sagged under the invisible weight of guilt and shame, his eyes refusing to meet Brooke's piercing glare. Haley's face was a mess of smeared mascara and desperation, her gaze flickering between me, Brooke, and the crowd that was now openly whispering about their fall from grace. I never wanted it to come to this, Haley croaked, her voice fragile and low. Please, Lucas, can't we just go somewhere and talk? Just the two of us? I laughed, but there was nothing funny about it. It was hollow, bitter. Talk? Now you want to talk? Haley, I begged you to talk to me before you decided to throw away everything we had for this. I gestured toward Connor, who stood there like a man waiting for the ground to open up and swallow him whole. Connor finally found his voice, though it came out low and strained. What do you want from us? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. Does that make you feel better? Brooke's eyes narrowed, her tone dropping to an icy chill. An apology? You really think a half-hearted sorry is enough after everything you've done? She shook her head, crossing her arms as her voice grew louder, sharp enough to cut through the murmuring crowd. This isn't about us feeling better. It's about making sure you, and everyone here, understand that actions have consequences. You don't just get to walk away from this without a scratch. The crowd leaned in, their curiosity now fully ignited. After all, it's not every day you witness two people being publicly unmasked like this. Haley clung tighter to Connor's arm, her voice trembling, desperate to escape. Let's go, Connor. Please. We don't have to stand here and take this. But Brooke leaned in slightly, her smirk as dangerous as it was confident. Oh, you're not going anywhere. The show's not over yet. Haley froze mid-step, her eyes widening with dread. What do you mean? Brooke shot me a quick glance, her grin growing even sharper. I gave her a small nod, the silent go-ahead. What I mean, Brooke continued, her voice slicing through the crowd's whispers. Is that what you've seen so far? That's just the beginning. The photos were just the appetizer. There's more to come. Isn't that right, Lucas? I stepped forward, my voice steady, cutting through the tension like a blade. That's right. You see, Connor, you've been a busy guy. Turns out, cheating isn't the only thing you're good at. You've got quite the history, both personally and professionally. Connor's face drained of color, his bravado slipping. You don't know what you're talking about. Brooke casually pulled a slim envelope from her clutch, holding it up like a trophy. Oh, but we do. Let's see, misappropriated client funds, under-the-table deals, and my personal favorite, falsified case results. You've been leaving a trail of dirt behind you, Connor. And tonight, it's all out in the open. Haley's hand shot to her mouth, her eyes darting between Connor and the damning envelope. What is she talking about, Connor? Connor stumbled over his words, trying to regain his footing. That's nothing. Lies. All of it. Is it? I asked, stepping in closer, my voice low but powerful. Because I've got a former paralegal from your firm ready to testify otherwise. And those financial records? They're pretty hard to argue with. The room fell into stunned silence, the crowd hanging on every word. Even the host stood frozen on stage, helpless to steer the event back on course. Connor's mouth opened, then closed again, like he was gasping for words that wouldn't come. Haley's panic grew, her voice rising. Connor, is this true? What is he talking about? But Connor didn't answer. His silence was louder than anything he could have said. Brooke took a step back, her mission complete. Well, I think that's enough excitement for one night. Don't you think, Lucas? I nodded, locking eyes with Haley one last time. We're done here. As Brooke and I turned to leave, the weight of everything we'd just done hit me, a strange cocktail of relief, triumph, and a bittersweet sadness for what had been lost. The echoes of gasps and hushed whispers trailed us as we stepped into the crisp night air. Brooke slid her arm through mine, her expression cool and composed, a quiet victory etched across her face. Think they'll ever bounce back? Brooke asked, a hint of amusement lacing her words. Not a chance, I replied, my voice steady and certain. For the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe again, like I was no longer shackled to the past. The days that followed felt like the quiet after a storm. The chaos we'd left behind at the gala rippled through Haley and Connor's lives, louder and faster than I'd expected. It wasn't just hushed whispers anymore. Their downfall was splashed across tabloids, trending on social media, and fueling endless office gossip. The perfect image they'd worked so hard to maintain crumbled overnight. Brooke and I kept our distance, content with the silent satisfaction of our victory. But beneath that surface, I felt an emptiness I couldn't ignore. Sure, I'd gotten my revenge, but somewhere along the way, I'd lost more than just Haley. I'd lost the part of myself that believed in love, the naive hope that things could work out if you just held on tight enough. The truth was, I didn't even recognize the guy staring back at me in the mirror anymore. Life didn't wait for me to catch up. Brooke threw herself into work with the kind of intensity that left no room for reflection. She tackled new cases, buried herself in long hours, and kept her mind busy. I tried to do the same, but distractions only worked for so long. The divorce papers were in motion, each phone call with my lawyer pulling me further away from the person I used to be. Then one evening, as I sat staring blankly at my computer screen, an unexpected email popped into my inbox. No subject line. No formal greeting. Just a handful of words that hit harder than I cared to admit. Lucas, I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to tell you. I know I ruined everything, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I'm not asking for anything, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I stared at the message, my chest tight with emotions I thought I'd buried. I'd been waiting for her to reach out, but not like this, not with raw honesty, stripped of excuses. It felt like the final nail in the coffin of what we'd once had, an acknowledgement of everything she'd destroyed. I started to type a reply, fingers hovering over the keys, but nothing felt right. I deleted it, closed the email, and exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Whatever closure I'd been chasing wasn't going to come from her words. I turned back to my work, determined not to let her unravel me again. And yet, her message lingered in the back of my mind like an old scar, not fully healed, not fully forgotten. Days passed, and I kept moving, one foot in front of the other. Brooke had her own demons to face, and we both understood that no matter how much the past haunted us, it couldn't define us. Starting over wasn't easy, but it was the only choice we had. I didn't have it all figured out. But as I stood by my window, looking out at the city lights flickering against the night sky, one thing was clear: I was in control now. And I'd be damned if I ever let someone take that from me again. Oddly enough, watching Haley and Connor's lives unravel wasn't as satisfying as I'd imagined. There was no sweet taste of victory, no sense of triumph. Just emptiness. But maybe that emptiness was a step in the right direction, a space where something new could begin. And so, my real journey started. Not the one I thought I wanted, but the one I desperately needed. The weight of it all lingered, heavy in the air. Part of me, the part that had loved her, believed in us, wanted to cave, to give her a chance to fix what she'd broken. But the part of me that had survived the lies, the betrayal, knew better. Some things can't be repaired. Some bridges burn too completely to ever be rebuilt. You can't fix this, I said finally, my voice cold and unyielding, the words landing like a verdict. You can go to therapy, you can try to patch yourself back together, but it won't change what you did. I can't just forget. Her shoulders slumped as if the weight of my words crushed what little resolve she had left. The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over, streaming down her face. I watched her unravel, but there was no satisfaction in it, no twisted sense of justice. Just emptiness. The rage that had fueled me for so long was gone, leaving behind something hollow, a space where pain had been carved too deep to fill. I don't want your forgiveness, I continued, my voice quieter now, but no less firm. I just need you to understand that what you did to me, what you did to us, can't be undone. It's over. We stood there in the hallway, frozen in the space between what we had been and what we had become. Two people who once shared everything, now strangers tethered only by the echoes of a past neither of us could fully escape. Her sobs filled the silence, fragile and broken, but I didn't move. I couldn't. I'll never forget the person I thought you were, I added, my words sharp with finality, but heavy with sadness. But I have to let you go. And I have to let go of the person I was with you. She inhaled a shaky breath, her nod more reflex than understanding. Maybe she grasped the truth, or maybe it was too painful to face head-on. Words had lost their magic somewhere along the way, Empty promises couldn't bridge this gap. She turned, her steps hesitant and uneven, like walking away from me cost her something she didn't realize she valued until it was gone. I stood there long after she disappeared from view, staring at the empty space where she'd stood, as if her absence carried more weight than her presence ever did. When I finally closed the door, the silence felt like it had teeth, biting, gnawing, suffocating. The days that followed blurred together, stitched with numbness. Haley was gone, but the sting of her betrayal lingered like a phantom limb. I could still feel it, even though it wasn't there anymore. Connor's life unraveled in real time, headlines and whispers documenting his fall from grace, but watching it didn't bring the satisfaction I'd thought it would. Revenge wasn't a cure. It was just another wound layered on top of the old ones. Brooke and I kept our distance from the wreckage we'd left behind, spectators to the aftermath we'd orchestrated. She poured herself into work, trying to outrun the ghosts of what we'd done, while I drifted through days that felt too long and nights that felt even longer. Then, one evening, she showed up at my apartment without warning. No text. No call. Just a knock at the door like she'd known I wouldn't say no. I was slouched on the couch, staring at a glass of bourbon I'd been nursing for the better part of an hour, the ice long since melted. She didn't say anything at first, just sat down beside me, her eyes scanning the quiet emptiness of the room. "You okay?" she asked softly, her voice breaking through the silence like it was afraid to be there. I didn't have an answer. How do you explain a feeling that doesn't fit neatly into words? How do you summarize the ache of everything and nothing at once? "I'm surviving," I said eventually, my voice rough, worn thin by the weight of it all. "Yeah," she whispered, nodding slightly. "Same here." We sat there, two people stitched together by shared scars, bound not by love or friendship but by something messier, something forged in betrayal, loss, and the fragile attempt to feel whole again. The silence between us wasn't heavy this time. It was just there. Like background noise you stop noticing after a while. "You know," Brooke said after a long pause, her eyes finding mine, "we could both use something easier. Something less complicated." "Like what?" I asked, the faintest ghost of a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. She shrugged, a small grin breaking through, softening the sharp edges of her usual confidence. "I don't know. Something that doesn't involve ruining people's lives." I laughed softly, the sound hollow but real. "Maybe. But at least we know how to get things done." Brooke turned to face me fully, her gaze steady and unflinching. "Yeah, we do. But that doesn't mean we have to keep doing it." Her words hit harder than I expected, not sharp like a knife, but heavy, like a truth I had been trying to ignore. I nodded slowly, letting the weight of her words settle in. She was right. We'd made our choices, carved our paths out of pain and pride, fueled by the need to reclaim control in the only ways we knew how. But now, standing here in the aftermath, the real question lingered: what would we do with that control? Neither of us had the answer. Not yet. But in that moment, with the silence stretching comfortably between us, it felt like enough just to not have to figure it out alone. The heaviness of everything that had happened still lingered, but it wasn't suffocating anymore. The rawness, the anger, the betrayal, they had been necessary steps, not destinations. The endgame wasn't revenge or vindication. It was survival. It was standing here, bruised but not broken, with a clearer sense of who I was and what I needed. It had taken heartbreak to get here, but that pain had shaped me into something stronger, something more self-aware. Brooke was right, we had walked through hell. But we hadn't done it alone. There was a strange comfort in knowing that, even when everything else felt like it was falling apart, we'd had each other's backs. We'd fought, not just against Haley and Connor, but against the parts of ourselves we'd ignored for too long, the parts that clung to illusions instead of facing reality. Later that evening, I found myself walking through the city streets, the neon glow of Manhattan blurring into streaks of light against the dark. The usual frantic energy felt distant, like I was an outsider watching someone else's life rush by. For the first time, I wasn't chasing something I'd lost. I wasn't trying to fix what was beyond repair. I was learning to rebuild, piece by fragile piece. It wasn't easy. It wouldn't be quick. But it was mine. My life. My terms. When I stepped into my apartment, the familiar hum of solitude greeted me. But this time, it didn't feel like isolation. It felt like a blank canvas, an empty space not defined by absence but by possibility. A place to figure out who I was without the shadows of my past dragging me down. I took a deep breath, letting it fill my chest, grounding me in the stillness. Then I closed the door behind me, not as an ending, but as a beginning. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Ready to start over. On my terms.